What's good? It's Woog. Keith Thurman will be fighting in 2023. They have just announced that Keith Thurman is going to be challenging Eimantas Stanionis for Stanionis' WBA welterweight title. Now, I know that this is a lesser or the regular WBA welterweight title. We all know that Terrence Crawford is the undisputed welterweight champion after his fight with Errol Spence Jr. But Keith Thurman is going to be coming off a 22-month layoff. And this looks like it's going to be, it's going to be on December 9th. That will be one of the last, if not the last, Showtime card. So this is going to be a Showtime pay-per-view. What we do know in terms of the remaining broadcast before Showtime boxing, closes its doors is that we are getting a David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade headlining fight. That's towards the end of November. And then we've got this December 9th card, which appears to also have Erislandy Lara versus Danny Garcia, and that's basically going to give Danny Garcia a crack at Erislandy Lara's 160-pound title. How Erislandy Lara has a middleweight title when he's basically fought Cornflake LaManna and Gary Spike O'Sullivan. Look, the WBC, they'll do some creative things in terms of distributing different belts and designating regular title holders and so forth. But Eimantas Stanionis captured that WBA regular belt. It still hasn't been elevated to full, but he won it against Radza Butayev in his last fight. So Stanionis will be coming off a very long layoff himself. And it's unfortunate for him because they have tried to make Eimantas Stanionis versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. 3 times. One time Stanionis had to pull out because of his appendix issue. I forgot the name of the surgery that he needed to have, or the ailment that caused him to need surgery. But that was the reason for the first cancellation. And then Virgil Ortiz Jr. had to pull out of the fight the other 2 times. Most recently, he had reportedly collapsed due to his rhabdomyolysis condition, which I really unfortunately feel like, I don't have all the facts here, but just in terms of what I've read and what I've witnessed in terms of the amount of times that there has been a fight cancellation, and also just what I've read about the disease. I mean, unless it's truly behind him, I think this could be something that not only plagues his career, but it's an existential threat to his career. That's how I see it right now, which is unfortunate because Virgil Ortiz Jr. is one of my absolute favorite fighters in this current generation to watch. He is phenomenal, ferocious puncher too. But Eimantas Stanionis will have been out of the ring since he beat Radza Butayev, and it's really been discouraging that he's had to go through these, you train and you prepare, like this is your moment. You're going to be fighting Virgil Ortiz Jr. and then the fight is canceled once again. I mean, that's just got to be heartbreaking from the fighter's perspective. Meanwhile, Keith Thurman, he was a former unified champion. He had back-to-back wins over a prime Sean Porter and a prime Danny Garcia. Keith Thurman was absolutely rocking and rolling. Not to mention he had beaten other very good fighters like Diego Chavez, when Diego Chavez was like that was a 50-50 fight, Diego Chavez versus Keith Thurman. In fact, I think that Diego Chavez might have been the A side. I'd have to look that up. But he had a win against him. He had a win against Robert the Ghost Guerrero. He had a win against Jesus Soto Cadas, who had beaten Andre Berto at one point. Andre Berto got injured in that fight, but yeah, Keith Thurman had very good wins. He was the first guy to beat Leonard Bundu. He beat Luis Collazo, and we're going to get back to that one because I think that fight is actually relevant if we're looking at Stanionis versus Keith Thurman. But Thurman was rocking and rolling. He had picked up a lesser WBA interim title around the time he beat Bundu, and then it was elevated to a regular title from interim to regular when he fought Robert the Ghost Guerrero, and then later elevated to full champion around the time that he fought Luis Collazo and then Sean Porter. So he was actually the ducked fighter of his era, because he still had like Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, who he eventually fought several years later, but he was wanting to get the big fights against the big names, and the bigger names just weren't having it. Like, who are you one time? And so Keith Thurman was just trying to build his reputation, build his win. I mean, he was a knockout artist for much of his career. Then he had those signature wins against Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, both very good fights, very competitive fights. Around that time, a lot of those top-notch A-level welterweight fights resulted in like split decisions or 115 to 113 types of wins, whether you're talking Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter, Keith Thurman versus Danny Garcia, or Sean Porter against Danny Garcia, and then later Errol Spence against Sean Porter, you know what I mean? But those wins were so key because they elevated, Keith Thurman's reputation as being, aside from that first ballot Hall of Fame class where you've got Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, the all-timers, and then you still had, Timothy Bradley, but Timothy Bradley by that point was fighting repeatedly against Manny Pacquiao, so he had already elevated to becoming a big name. But in terms of the guys who were still in the trenches and having to fight kind of the other tough guys who were young and up and coming and, just being in that type of position, the way that I saw it was a class of Keith Thurman or Kell Brook, being that Kell Brook had beaten Sean Porter, when Sean Porter had won the title against Devin Alexander and then knocked out Paulie Malignaggi. So pre-Errol Spence, I looked at the best, current generation welterweights as being Keith Thurman and Kell Brook, and I actually wanted to see them fight pretty badly. But after that fight against Danny Garcia, where at this point Keith Thurman is 28-0, he's a WBC and WBA champion with wins over the guys that I just mentioned and Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. This was in 2017. He didn't return to the ring for like another 2 years, dealing with hand or elbow related injuries. So that was the last of prime Keith Thurman. And it's really sad because yes, he did earn a good amount of money. Yes, he did have a couple of signature wins, but it's like you wanted to see him get the full juice out of the squeeze out of all of that talent around that time when you could tell he was still hungry, he was still devoted, he was still just super on point, very sharp boxer puncher. But then he again was out of the ring for 2 years, comes back to fight Josecito Lopez. He wins via pretty wide margin, but he hit a very scary point like in the 5th, 6th round where he was basically super wobbly. I don't know how he was still standing, and he was nearly defenseless to where he wasn't moving well. He was getting hit. His head was getting rocked back by just regular jabs or straight rights. His head was just getting boom, just knocked back, and it was not looking good. I'm like, damn, is Josecito Lopez about to stop Keith Thurman? But Keith Thurman pulled it out. I mean, he got out of that scary situation, ended up, winning the fight, but I think it was actually a majority decision win. So that tells you how hairy that fight got. And then Keith Thurman basically had his monumental payday against Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao won via split decision. Keith Thurman doesn't return to the ring for like another 2.5 years. So he fights Pacquiao July of 2020. Remember, March 2020 is when, or March of 2020 is when boxing shut down due to COVID. So he went the whole 2020 without fighting, went the whole 2021 without fighting. Didn't return until February 2022 against Mario Barrios. He won a unanimous decision. He looked pretty good, but at the time we knew Mario Barrios as being the guy who, edged the win against Batir Akhmedov and then got knocked out, against Gervonta Tank Davis. So, I mean, that's a knockout win that's going to age beautifully for Tank Davis, stopping Mario, going up to 140 and stopping Mario Barrios, because we just saw Mario Barrios beat Ugas. But yeah, he gave Keith Thurman a pretty good fight, but Keith Thurman won pretty clearly via unanimous decision. And this was February of 2022. We're now in October 2023, and Keith Thurman hasn't fought since. So not only are you dealing with somebody who's about to be a 35-year-old, but it's not like they're an active or even a half active 35-year-old. We're not talking like one fight every 12 months or one fight every 9 months. We're talking pretty much one fight basically every couple of years. You know what I mean? Even if he fought in the calendar year of 2022, that was in the beginning of 2022. We are at the end of 2023. So I look at that as damn near, 2 years. So that is almost a half retired fighter, to the point where, people stop getting excited about the return of Keith Thurman, or, kind of speculating who was he going to fight next? Was he going to test one of these young guns like a Boots Ennis or a Virgil Ortiz, or was he going to get in there with a Terrence Crawford, or was Errol Spence going to finally agree to fight Keith Thurman because they've had their, rivalry on, okay, you iced me when I was a young up and comer, I'm going to ice you now that you're asking for a fight. One of those dynamics. So any excited speculation about Keith Thurman, look, I wouldn't have been surprised if he just quietly retired. If he, might or might not have even announced it, but just don't return. And, before you know it, you see the guy and he's a little more overweight. And he's like, yeah, I'm just living the good life. One of those types of things. I would not have been surprised. And I am actually surprised that he is returning to fight Eimantas Stanionis. I thought that he was going to try to fight somebody more, maybe a rematch with Danny Garcia. Hell, potentially middleweight champion, which is crazy because I still kind of view Danny Garcia as a 140 guy. That's where he, in my opinion, was at his absolute best. Then he went to 147. Then he had one fight at 154 against, the smaller Benavidez, the older brother, smaller Jose Benavidez. And now he's going to be fighting at 160. So yeah, that's a little bit ridiculous to be able to say, yeah, I want a belt here. Because Erislandy Lara is hardly a middleweight is what I'm saying. But I thought Keith Thurman was going to take somebody who is somebody like a Jose Benavidez, even though it looks like it might be Jermall Charlo that ends up fighting Jose Benavidez, but somebody who has a name, but is, less risk and you might get paid fairly well. Like, again, a rematch with Danny Garcia, or obviously if Conor Benn decided to fight you and you could fly out to Britain or have him come out here, wherever makes the most sense dollars wise, and have a fight with Conor Benn. I thought that a big name was going to be a must for Keith Thurman to get back into the ring. But I don't know what the financials are on these winding down days of Showtime boxing till maybe, they're able to, PBC is able to just use the rest of the budget and pay these fighters pretty well, just stack these pay-per-view cards and, and just have at it. I don't know what the exact closing situation is there, but yeah, on a card that already has Erislandy Lara and Danny Garcia, no, this probably still shouldn't be a pay-per-view. Back in the day, in the older HBO Showtime days, this would have been an HBO Showtime type fight, even if you're dealing with a former champion in Keith Thurman and a young, kind of uncrowned, regular, lesser belt holder in Eimantas Stanionis. That would have been a HBO or Showtime level fight, not a pay-per-view. But again, I am surprised that he's going after a young lion who's got a lot to prove, who's got to be super hungry, especially with all the disappointing cancellations. Eimantas Stanionis. And the thing is, if Keith Thurman has an Achilles heel, I don't even know if we're going to get the same Keith Thurman that performed to that degree against Mario Barrios in this next fight against Eimantas. I don't know where Keith Thurman is ability and performance wise. You take 22 months off between the ages of 26 to 28, maybe you're okay. 32 to 34, I don't know. 33 to 35, it only gets worse as you age. So I don't even know what version of Keith Thurman we could expect. But even at Keith Thurman's best, his Achilles heel was often to the body. I said I was going to bring up that Collazo fight. Look how badly Collazo hurt Keith Thurman to the body, to where Keith Thurman was moving around the ring trying to stay away. And then we saw Keith Thurman get hurt to the body against Manny Pacquiao, visibly, observably. He gets so hurt to the body, he will take his mouthpiece out by the glove and run. You know what I mean? We saw him get hurt to the body again against Mario Barrios. And if you don't like getting hurt to the body, boy, you're going to have a hell of a time fighting Eimantas Stanionis, because his signature punch is following a jab up with a left hook to the body. He likes to put that jab, boom, that 1-2 where it's actually a 1-3. Eimantas Stanionis is pretty vicious with that, and he's got a super crisp jab. Where is Keith Thurman's head movement? At his best, again, very, very sharp boxer with some very good power. Right now, maybe the first couple of rounds he can move his head well, but when you're in your mid-30s and you don't train like you used to, and your body doesn't respond to workouts like it used to, your lower back tends to stiffen up. It gets harder to move around. Just go, do it, in your own room. Just move at the torso and try to slip and act like you're rope training where you're going under the rope. Do that for a couple of minutes and then, take a little jog, throw some punches, and then do it again. Do it for another couple of minutes. It doesn't take long before your lower back starts to tighten up. And when your back starts to tighten up, your legs become less mobile. And when that starts happening, happening, your head movement just goes to complete trash. Like we see it with even good fighters, fighters that aren't as old as Keith Thurman, like Caleb Plant. We see what happens with his defense when he really starts to tire. It's not a novel phenomenon here. So with a jab like Eimantas Stanionis's and his 10 to 12 round durability, not to mention the inactivity for Thurman, not to mention Stanionis's tendency to just dig to the body with rip you with vicious punches. Oh man, Keith Thurman might have a hell of a time in here. I would be very surprised if he's able to come back nearly 2 years after that fight with Barrios and beat somebody the caliber of Eimantas Stanionis. So props to Keith Thurman for making this his comeback fight. I didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think he was going to fight Boots. Didn't think he was going to fight Virgil. Didn't think he was going to fight Stanionis. I thought, again, he was going to go for somebody where you could maximize some name recognition and try to mitigate danger a bit. But yeah, this is a dangerous fight. Huge opportunity, and I'm happy for Stanionis that he does have this opportunity, because for all the cancellations and the disappointments, here he actually gets to fight somebody with a A-list name in the boxing game, with a big name where you could kind of, I mean, it's not exactly like beating like a Manny Pacquiao, but I mean, there's only been one person to ever beat Keith Thurman, and it was Manny Pacquiao. Like, Keith Thurman is serious business. And I don't know if he's a future Hall of Famer. I don't know if he was able to sustain his prime for long enough to be a Hall of Famer. I don't know about that. I guess I would maybe lean no. Let me know if you think Keith Thurman is a Hall of Famer. He was a Hall of Fame talent. He was showing a level of performance where it's like, yeah, if you can do that for like another couple years against another couple fighters, Hall of Fame, no doubt. But he just didn't do that. He stopped fighting at his absolute prime. You know what I mean? But yeah, this is going to be a big name and big opportunity for Stanionis, because if they didn't know him then, they're going to know him if he beats Keith Thurman. And so, yeah, I'm pretty happy that this kind of at least softens the blow of basically losing over a year, maybe closer to a year and a half of your career. Just think back. The last time Stanionis was in the ring was I believe it was on the Spence versus Ugas undercard. Remember, they had that early day card on the same day of the fight where Stanionis fought Butayev? That was like in the first half of 2022. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's very fortunate that he's going to be able to get Keith Thurman in the ring with him, assuming that the fight goes forward and that nobody gets injured in training camp and so forth. But yeah, if I had to guess who was going to win this, I'm going to do a deeper dive and I'm going to do an actual, preview video as we near the date of the fight. But if I had to just kind of go with my initial gut without without rewatching a lot of their fights and doing that level of analysis, I would have to say Stanionis, but not via stoppage. I think that Keith Thurman has enough craft, enough savvy, enough heart, enough skill still to be able to go the distance. But it's just hard for me to picture Keith Thurman staying active enough over the course of 12 rounds to win a decision against Stanionis at this juncture of their respective careers. But yeah, let me know what your earliest thoughts are on this matchup. This one kind of surprised me, but yeah, let me know your thoughts, and let me know your thoughts about that whole card as it's shaping up right now. Like, are they done, building the card? Because as it stands, again, Erislandy Lara versus Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman against Eimantas Stanionis, or it should actually be Eimantas Stanionis versus Keith Thurman, but I get it, for promotional purposes and for marketing purposes, they're going to probably flip that, make Keith Thurman the A side, similarly to how they're doing Devin Haney versus Prograis. Usually the champion, right, is going to be the A side. It's going to be the person on the left side of the flyer. It's going to be the person to enter the ring last. With Prograis Haney, Prograis will enter the ring last like a champion should, but it's going to be Devin Haney on the left side of the flyer, and I think that his name is going to come first, that type of thing, again, for marketing purposes, and Eddie Hearn said as much. But yeah, we've got those two fights on this December 9th Showtime card, but we also have, what is it? That's not official, but I hear that it's coming together. A rematch between Chris Colbert and Jose Valenzuela. Remember, Chris Colbert won the controversial decision after getting dropped badly. Did he get dropped multiple times in that fight? I remember walking away from that one at least feeling like, Jose Valenzuela won it, but you know, because it's judged round by round, there is an argument that you can make for Chris Colbert winning that fight too. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about how this card is shaping up and who are you going with just in terms of your early instincts between Keith Thurman and Eimantas Stanionis. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.